Johnson, and as we said, I grew up in Norway, so I have an accent if you're wondering. Besides working here, the first place I went to was California, where I worked with recovery of Pacific salmon in California for National Marine Fisheries Service. Also, you worked for Fishery, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service there for a while. And then I started a new project of mine that I call the Great Salmon Tour. The idea is to document the diversity of salmon species, or salmonid species, we're just going to talk more about, but also as important, the people that are connected to these species somehow, and the culture that's around it. And the idea is a little bit, if the salmon disappear, or the resource, if the species disappear, biological diversity is lost, then not only species or a natural resource is lost, but also our own cultural heritage and our cultural diversity, and the people that's connected to the cultures that evolved around it also lose something that's important for them. We lose that. We're going to talk more about that, see if we can figure out how these things work. I guess it's like this. It's not true. It's this. So yeah, the Great Salmon Tour is a trip. I said in 2010 I traveled to a couple of places. I hope that this year I'll go to even more places. And the idea is to see as many different salmon species or salmonid species as possible, and also to interact and explore the ways that people interact and connect to these fish. And this is me, this is a little bit me, you guys think I said already. So I have to talk a little bit about salmon or trout. Yeah, we have a connecting people. That's a fish that people care about, and this is just some slides of, we have salmon festivals ranging from, most of these are from somewhere in the U.S., mostly the Northwest, but one of them from Korea. So it's a fish, it's a species, different species that people do connect with. It's not, it's an important thing for us. And the idea behind also this project is that, everybody, kind of biological diversity come into like mainstream media, everybody talks about it, people know it. But what is really biological diversity, and what does it mean? The idea, and for most people, it has to do with tigers in India, or sea turtles, or the tropics, exotic places where they do not going to go, or species they're not going to see, or they really do not have to care about. So the idea was to bring a species, or talk about diversity in terms of species that people actually do know and actually do have interacted with, if nothing else, at least on the dinner table. But people do not think about it necessarily in terms of biological diversity when it comes to salmon. So therefore, introduce them to this concept through something that they know, they have thought about, and also a species that is part of our world. The temperate northern hemisphere part of the world, and show that biodiversity and what happens to it is not only something that happens in the tropics, it's also something that happens here in our northern part of the world. And like I said, this again, something people are familiar with. It's common food in restaurants. You get it. People have it, especially now when you get farming of salmon and trout, even common on the family dinner table. It even is part of our pop culture, shown here to the movie Salmon Fishing in the Yemen. It's about, I guess, a guy that goes to Yemen and tries to introduce trout or some salmon in for the sheikhs so they can go fish, because even in Yemen they heard about salmon fishes. So it's something that we relate to throughout the world. And as I said, like most people do not think about it in terms of, however, biological diversity or those kind of issues at all. And this is just an example. Even though we here in the U.S. we have 6 different species alone here in the U.S. alone that we call salmon. But if you do go to a restaurant, usually a menu would just say salmon, even though they, what kind of salmon? Next time we go to a restaurant, ask the waiter, like, what kind of species is it? And I'm not sure they will be able to answer it. But instead, there's 6 of them, 6 different species we call salmon, and talk a little bit about these things. Also, it was meant to bring some different kind of smoked salmon that happened in the car. I forgot to bring it up, and then I'll bring it up before the end of the talk, or have someone to bring it up before the end of the talk, so you can taste, like, also not only see the different species, but even taste the differences. See what's the next. So again, that's how it is part of our culture. So salmon, we don't only eat them, we don't even sell them. They're not only like important as food, important as economically important for people, right? But when people interact with the natural resource, and especially with something like salmon, that interaction often, especially if it goes a long time, express itself throughout the culture of the people. It gets part of who we are, or who the community are. Most obvious is Native Americans in the US, where the whole mythology, their creation stories, their identity, as well as economically, was all centered through the big salmon runs that were up in the Northwest. So many of the tribes has the creation story is the salmon came up the river, and that's the beginning of the tribe. And here's some expressions of how it's important for us. Like I said, they have the Mountain Trout Festival in Korea. We have the steelhead, I believe that is, on the Washington 24-cent coin. You have some symbolism, fishing for salmon, like anglers, the cultural connection and what it means for them to be able out there and with a fly fishing rod and pose, just get this picture. That is culture, go out there. Even up in the north, penetrate into, you have several beers, I call it, you have the Steelhead Brewery and God know what, and wine, where they have. So it's part of our culture. So, as important as the diversity of salmon, about salmon in this talk, is about how we are, the diversity of cultures and diversity of ways that we connect to the salmon. And the idea is to show that when a natural resource disappears, biological diversity, showing that directly when biological diversity or species disappear, the functional relationship that people, communities, or individuals have had with that resource is lost. Functional relationship might be, food, economically, one of those things. But so not only do you lose the species, you lose that functional connection, but you also lose that cultural, traditional identity connections as to that species. And that cannot, the fish can be replaced. You can put, let's say, the fish goes extinct in the river. Maybe you can train the fishermen, or in the sea, to train the fishermen to be plumber instead, or cater to tourism, and take them out whale watching, whatever it is, your economic opportunity to recreate for that. But you cannot recreate the culture and the way that people identify and live with the species. And that is one thing that come again and again with people I talk to throughout my travels, to see this difference. It's not so much about food, it's not so much about economics, it is about that cultural or personal connections. So before we even start talking, like I said, this is about the diversity of salmonids or trout, salmon and trout, and I'm going to talk with you a little bit about, first going to go through the taxonomy a little bit, or the species and life history, just show you a little bit of this variation, because it's pretty, it's an exciting group of fish, the salmonids. Just for you, that I guess you all know this, is taxonomy. You have the kingdom, the phylum, the class, order, family, and that's when you have the salmonida. And then the genus we have, how many different, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 living genera. And an example of a species is Salmon, which is the Atlantic salmon. So we're going to concentrate on just this one has thing like to promote. Yeah, it does. So this talk, my whole project here, concentrate about species within this family, so within this genera here. And to start with what we call salmon, I said was 6 different salmon species here in the US alone. And so we have our Chinook, the king, which is probably the most economically, the most Nova. We have the coho, a silver salmon. Also is spread from Alaska down to California. We have the sockeye salmon confined in Washington up to Alaska. We have Sherman dog salmon. I can tell you a story behind that. The dog salmon is called because they often do not have that quality on the meat, so human consumption. So therefore it's usually caught by, up in Alaska and Native Americans to feed the dogs. However, there's a twist on that, and maybe I can tell you that later. So we also then have the pink salmon, also called the humpback salmon, mostly it actually, some years they come all the way down to California, but they don't have any full populations that like permanent there. They come there, spawn, and then they disappear, and some years later you might come some up the river. And then on this side of the coast, this side, the Atlantic salmon, which you have here. So that's our 6 salmon species in the U.S., native to the U.S. And within the 48 lower states, all of these species are or populations of these species are listed as threatened or endangered on the endangered species list. So this is also about protection and recovery and of salmon species. Salmon life cycle. I'm going to say a little bit about salmon first. First, salmon is meaningless. Doesn't really have any biological or taxonomic meaning per se. That's as you saw there, no taxonomic meaning because you have the Atlantic salmon, which is Salmon salar, and then you have all the Pacifics, like Oncorhynchus, and then you have other genera that's also people call salmon. The only thing that most salmon, what we call salmon, has in common is that they're anadromous. They spawn in the river, they then migrate down to the sea, go in the sea where they grow, and then go back up into the river to spawn when they're mature. So that's the anatomy from they grow in the sea, spawn in the river. However, there are trouts, a lot of trouts that do the same thing. So it's not like that. It's like almost can say, even though that's not really true, to almost say like all salmon are anadromous, but not all anadromous fish are salmonids are salmon, called salmon. So that's why I say salmon doesn't really have a meaning biological taxonomically per se. One of the things that are important for this life cycle though is that when they go out, the smolt is the stage when they go from freshwater into the sea. And during that time period, here they're just, a few inches long or whatever when they enter the sea. This is Chinook salmon, smolt. And by the time they're ready to go back, they increase several folds in size. And I guess that's the benefit of that life cycle going into the sea. And that also gives a benefit for us human beings, which is going to come to here. So they come back into the rivers to spawn, and so it's synchronized. So you have a short period of time when you have a lot of fish in the river. So that's a huge resource for those that can use that. And because they're in the rivers, a lot of them, they're relatively easy to catch during that time period. Also for human beings, it's relatively easy to catch the fish during that time. So in the northwest, where you do have salmon, it is an enormous resource, and it's important because, first of all, I say it's many of them, relatively easy to catch, and they bring marine nutrients into the freshwater system, which is important both for the ecosystem there and for the people using it. So it's an enormous resource. So therefore, it's been enormously important. And of course, for Native Americans, the historic population or prehistoric populations of Native Americans in the Northwest was where we had the highest density of population, human population, and because of these resources. And trout, on the other hand, they are also trout doesn't have any taxonomic and biological meaning either, except that we have some idea. Trout usually are freshwater fish. They do not go into the ocean. So they are smaller than salmon. Even though you do have something called trout, like if you remember the two guys holding that big fish, that is a trout, and it never goes to the ocean. It is in the rivers in Mongolia. So they can get big, even though we call them trout, or they're not called salmon per se. And you also have trout like steelhead trout, which is the same species as rainbow trout, but the steelhead trout is the rainbow that goes to the ocean anadromous and grows and gets really big and go back into the river. So even though they're not called salmon, they're considered salmon, but they have the life cycle as a salmon. Here's the cutthroat trout here. I caught all by myself. Very good. It's from Idaho. And then some brown trout from Norway that we elect to fish there. Like I said, so this is a Hutchothymen. It's not really called a salmon. Some call it Thymen salmon. It's mostly because of the size. Never goes out in the ocean. It stays in the rivers in Mongolia. This fish when I went to Mongolia, and stays in the river there, and just because the rivers are big, it eats anything. It can even eat anything from birds to rats to other fish. They become pretty enormous. But still, it's a trout. Where was it? Yeah. But the trout, what's important for people when it comes to trout is that it is basically, especially in northern areas, when you come to like Arctic areas and up north, it is the only freshwater fish that really get to a size and big enough populations enough to provide a food resource for human beings. So therefore, trout too, it has been culturally and economically, nutritionally, and eventually culturally important